Welcome back. Welcome back. Welcome back, everybody, to another chapter of Hazardous Technology and the Minds Who Make It. Writ- written by Ukulele Villain and read by yours truly, Freewata. We are back here today after our little intermission going on that got us a bunch of different character perspectives on it, and seeing how we did well. Not everyone, is good at like naturally good in their own right. They all kind of had their own, like the author was saying, like their own biases, their own ways of looking at these, and their own answers and how to handle it best. And seeing that, like, from one side of where Caitlin is like, feels like she wants to do the right thing no matter what. She wants to try and be nice to Powder, even though no one else is, and she doesn't feel like she can get through all the way to like Marcus's part where it's like, you know, I think Marcus is on the Piltover side working with the Undercity, and they're kind of like, it looks like they're conspiring together, at least from what I'm getting. And then even into Echo, just being Echo because I love him and he's awesome. Before we get into this chapter, we got another end notes for this one, and we'll go ahead and get into that. Fun fact: Illuminerd is something Vi called Victor in League canon. I cannot thank Arcane enough for letting these characters swear and call each other nicknames that extend past Saturday morning cartoon ideas. I'm amazed by the response to this story. Thank you all for the responses. And thank you as well. Now let's get back into it with part two. Welcome home. Victor. Victor dreamt. He was looking out the window of the lab. Trees dotted the landscape instead of Piltover's finer urban jungle. Trees and fog and trees and snow were growing at an army's marching pace. He had seen his first real tree when he was 16. The academy had brought them on a field excursion to witness the timber farms and understand how the technology created at the academy could be applied in real time to Piltover's industries. A tree sprouted up from his desk, laying its branches across calculations and glass beakers. A fragile sprout with purple flowers brushed against his nose. Victor was not worried, only curious. Do trees have flowers, not just fruit? His stomach lurched and he began to cough. A deep spasm went through his chest. He reached for his throat, scrambling, squabbling. Jace was there. He was running around the lab trying to rip off each purple bloom before they could regrow. Victor, the trees aren't meant to have flowers, he yelled, confirming Victor's concern. Victor's curiosity was plucked and crushed. They're not. His botany skills were non-existent. Heimerdinger will have our heads. Victor's old mentor would go to the council, accuse them of breaking the ethos of moving too fast in their work. Everything moved too quickly for Heimerdinger. There were trees as tall as the ceiling now. Jace had gone to grab the hex gauntlets. Victor coughed again. The pollen in the room was suffocating. Blood and fluid spewed from his mouth and across the tables that were turning into a mossy soil. Jace dived and disappeared into the fog that was the lab, the forest, with heroics and unflinching intent. He yelled something back to Victor that was lost as his partner leaned on his cane and looked to the ceiling of the lab. It had been covered with tree branches. Victor heard rustling from above. His breath hitched, and he coughed for a third time. A flash of blue hair and olive green overalls darted between the branches with a maniacal laugh. He knew it was her, and had no hesitancy in calling out, "Tell me in what world this situation would be funny. I would like to avoid that place at all costs, Powder." "You think it's regulation to shoot the targets from up here?" It had been a cold day. "Even if it wasn't, I feel that you'd still be attempting it," Victor said, speaking over Powder's shrugs and articulated sound effects. She had a litany of noises that sometimes could be articulated into a few variations of "What? Me?" The trees had grown so dense that there was no escape forward or backward. The only way out was up. "Victor, what's your favorite animal?" He started to try and pick the flowers before Jace returned. one hand on his cane and the other yanking at the invasive plants. They had an elongated petal that made them look like vases, and purple powder colored his full hand. A frog or a salamander. Butterflies are nice too. You may be a great hex tech scientist, but you're awful with grammar. I said animal, like singular, Vicky. Bah! He was struggling to carry the flowers now. He had had to switch to the first cluster to his cane hand. Where was Jace? Where was Heimerdinger? Coming for you? The proud inventor of the terms sex tech and sex claw? The fact the entire city of Progress signed off on Hex as the starting line for every portmanteau is horrifying. If Talus's jaw wasn't freakishly chiseled, you know the parodies would be intense. This is why beautiful people need to be stopped. Aye, we've been here before. They had been in the forest on the edge of Piltover, understanding the course before a competition. That was 5 years ago. Powder, what is your favorite animal? A shark. That was the snap he needed. Some described waking from unconsciousness like a slow climb to awareness. For him, it was quickened. Easy, easy. A refined accent, a hint of upper Piltover and raspiness said. Victor immediately knew the man who was propping him into a chair before a gargantuan, circular window barred with thick, industrial metal frames and mullions. The transition from dream to reality was quick, but not entirely painless. Victor hissed as a sharp pinch entered his neck and inserted something into his veins. Oh ho ho, singed. I told the girl to be delicate, but when have these cycles of violence ever paid attention to detail? You've been coughing up a severe amount of blood across the lab floor. Victor swallowed, the iron and heavy taste confirming what the man was saying. He tilted his head to Dr. Singed. The doctor, his old friend and first mentor, was balding, had more wrinkles around his mouth. He was shorter, too? No, you were small when you first met him. He was larger than life before everything. Victor kept his eyes half open. He was piecing together what had happened, unsure how much time had passed or what Singed had just inserted into him. He was careening into ideas and panic, pushing past it to get to one notion. Where is my cane? Other questions were still competing for his attention, though. I'm not restrained. There are so few people in this room. It's not a warehouse. Carpets, desk, windows. Something moved, flew outside the window. Victor was an instant away from asking where he was, a weakness that he would have begrudged showing to Singed, but the man answered for him. This is an old lab of an even older associate. He loves the lake creatures. It's one of the better spaces for business to be conducted. I gave you biotic fluids for your cough. That should keep your body from mutinying against you for a brief time. Victor swallowed. They were deep somewhere. Perhaps a refinery or repurposed mining area in the Undercity. Enough of that. You're asking the wrong questions. Find your cane. Victor watched Singed move closer and rest a hand on his shoulder. Victor's disgust must have been apparent because Singed sighed, saddened. Victor hated him more for that. It would be simple to hate a mentor who had only used him and lied to him. Singed was a cruel monster who had once seen a crippled boy from the Undercity and shown him his immense kindness, bordering on love. Another avenue of escape was close to Victor. With Singed present, he could not pretend to be a foolish or feeble person, to be foolish or feeble when this man had used to champion Victor's passions. If you needed money, you could have just written me. Victor threw out the line, hoping Singed's pride would override Victor's poor deception. Singed went to the desk and came back with Victor's cane. He held it out. Unfortunately, nothing is as simple as money. And to be frank, it's not me who's in need of you. Victor took the cane and stared at the ground. He said a silent prayer to whatever gods could hear him or deign to turn their eyes to him. He willed himself to not touch the second handle of his cane. It had to not exist. He rested the cane across his lap and decided to let Singed give him any more information. Singed moved away from Victor when heavy footfalls from a stairway behind them descended into determined, rhythmic succession. You would never guess they had known one another. Victor's old mentor gave away nothing. Another favor from a terrible man. If Victor lived, he knew Singed would have a tally to call upon. My body is quickly fading. He was horrified to let himself think of it. For 3 months he had been avoiding the signs, staying away from Powder's keen glare. I'll die before he can wring from me any opportunity and benefit. The grim satisfaction of denying someone who hurt him could only go so far, though. He held on to the slip of smugness until the person from the top of the stairs arrived. She had steel-toed boots, a cropped cut of violet-colored hair, and while Victor could tell even from the dim light that she was almost certainly finely muscular, she moved with grace. A small tattoo was on her cheek. V.I. Vi. Too young. An ache went through him at her eyes, a soft gray that could turn mischievous and triumphant after shooting a paper ball into a wastebasket with a catapult she had built from magnets, weights, and spoons. Victor pushed Powder from his thoughts. She had no place in this scenario. The woman dragged a chair across from Victor, her back to the depths of the river. He was prepared for all manner of undercity traditions of extortion. Sorry about bringing you across the river like this. She was curt, but she meant it. He had planned to keep quiet, but he was too stunned. She had to be a little younger than him. I cannot say yet if I forgive you. Victor took a small amount of satisfaction in watching the young woman mull over his answer. Fair, very fair. She leaned forward on her knees, flexing her hands and looking him up and down. That accent, Cinch moved to leave the room and left Victor internally terrified like the boy of 13 who had thought the lonely chemist had hung the stars. Coughs erupted, ruining the demeanor he was using as a shield. The woman pulled a rag from her pocket and threw it at Victor. You can call me Vi, by the way. You may call me Victor. Strange pleasantries between them were walls building an indiscernible maze. Victor squeezed the top handle of his cane. Powder's chiding voice popped into the back of his mind, sighing and whining that he should have lied and used the pseudonym surname that Powder had made for the both of them. Fisher. Like fissures, Vicky. The rag fell to the floor, forcing Victor to lean to pick it up. Wondering what she'd ask soon of him, Vi inquired casually. You're not actually from Topside? He could tell she already knew the answer. She had the appearance of a brute fighter in her physique, but like her grace, there was cleverness in her questions. He looked at her arms and hands, which were covered by a long cape-like cowl. He wondered if she had augmentations done. The accent has always given it away. Victor's mother had told him of her father, and the mother who had given birth to that father and her mother before. There had been wars, and their people had not been liked by any of the wars as winners or losers. They had fled until they had found a place that would be called Zaun, but the name never stayed. Piltover had made sure of that, with the canal built to separate them. Piltover's Undercity could not be given its own real name. And you're happy there? It was a challenge, insultingly familiar to conversations he and Powder tiptoed around. Her gray eyes flashed a deep purple in the dark. Victor assured himself that his own stress and blood loss had made that little anomaly occur. This isn't the first person to demand you bow to them and their cruelty. His temper, kept usually close to his chest, flared. His sympathies for her, for a fellow child of Zon, were challenged in the face of the violences she had done to him. This person held his already diminishing life in her hands, and incredulousness was overriding any self-preservation. Please, this small talk before you deliver the ultimatum. It is taxing. He muttered the last part, swallowing a cough. Vi rolled her eyes like he was a child. They flash some fine, pompous sun into your eyes, Illuminerd. There is no ultimatum. There's only the work you're going to do for Zon, For me. She laughed at his alarmed look. It was warm, hearty, and relaxed at Victor's expense. Vi let her laughter fade before she turned to the window porthole, really, and asked, "What do you think of them?" A creature the size of a small carriage swam close by, enough that Victor could see hundreds of teeth. He wondered how long they had been here, and if they were trapped in an intersecting portion of the canal. They had grown from nothing more than eggs, eating whatever runoff and sludge came their way. He knew Vi would make fun of him for it. This was probably a test of sorts. He could not bring himself enough to care. Though, they're beautiful. Her small sounded more bitter than genuine. Really? I hate them. They're the ugliest sun-adverse shits I've ever seen. The overhanging dim lights in the room cast a shadow over his strange captor's appearance. She had not taken him for money, or to extort Jace or Piltover, that much was certain. This was something haunting. It terrified Victor that he would recognize the ambition that was in Jace in his own eyes and hers. What throne would this woman mount? What bridges would she burn and armies would she conquer? Where would she go with that look? And how long would Victor be chained to her side? It doesn't matter. They won't survive if they keep sucking in Undercity river water. He had no notions if he had passed whatever test had been put before him, an agitating fact. But Vi stood back from her seat and motioned with her head towards what Victor realized was a lift at the end of the room. She took a key out from inside the cloak she was wearing and unlocked a box with a switch. He realized he'd have to follow her. Your mistake. He had been terrible with botany and plants, a mess at cooking or keeping the house clean, and overall, he was baffled at anyone who could play an instrument. He was an amazing architect, though, with an intense understanding of spatial distance and remembrance of room layout. Victor kept his head down, leaned on his cane, and demurely followed Vi into the lift. I'm sorry for the wounds this place has given you, but singed and you don't realize I'm going to bring whatever horrors you're committing down around your fucking ears. Vi gave him a harsh pat on his back. Welcome home, by the way. This changes into the perspective of Powder. Her eyes took an hour to adjust to the lane's artificial lights. The sun was gone. Or had it ever existed? The roofs and high-wired areas that had been terrifying to Powder as a girl of 11 were nothing after a decade. It was the same sensation of tinkering with an uncooperative machine, begging and pleading before finally taking a step back. You would return in 24 hours, and the problem's solution that had evaded you was now clear. She leapt from roofs with an ease that had been missing as a child, and gone while atop the buildings in Piltover. Powder had feared she wouldn't be able to do it again. The rooftops of the academy, her and Victor's apartment, and the trees outside of Piltover were predictable. Fissure folk made their homes out of scrap, and the sheets of material that had seen families struggle and grow, and flourish and struggle again. The brothel was still in swing, and vendors still littered the lanes with exotic animals in crates and cages. Powder deluded herself into thinking that a pause button had been pressed, wholly ignoring that the smell of shimmer was intoxicating and in the air stronger than the years of her childhood. Then she saw a statue. She had been subconsciously moving towards the last drop, despite her intentions to search everywhere else in the lanes first. Her feet betrayed her and kept twisting towards it. Powder almost missed a ledge and plummeted, but caught a gutter with her hands before befalling that fate. She scrambled up the ledge on her stomach, checking herself for damage that was not there. It could have been a life-size statue. Vander had been physically big, a stern and booming voice that could be gentle to his allies and family. He never told Powder where he came from. That story was for Vi. Echo and her used to make up adventures that Vander had gone on, based all around hearsay and the relics that decorated Vander's bar. Milo had called them stupid. No one needed to know Vander's past to understand he was special. Powder swung down to the cobblestone streets. There was a barren fountain around the statue. No coins, but the area was surprisingly clean and free of graffiti. Powder's throat was closing up looking at. It would have fit well, even in Piltover. There were too many gaudy statues of Professor Stanwyck, apparently one of the guys who forged Piltover, and didn't think for a second, maybe this place is fucked. Heimerdinger once lectured to her class in front of the statues. Powder was exceptionally proud of herself for not curling her hand into a fist with a limp wrist motion and waving it back and forth in a pulling repetition. Victor had made a face when Powder told him about her day. I used to think their eyes were following me. One time during finals, I had a dream they were chasing me. First rule of dreams, Vicky. If someone's chasing you, turn around and go for the eyes. Focus, dipshit. Powder had hung about the lanes for a few hours, listening to fill in gaps of information. Vander had been the hound, guarding its underworld and keeping order. Despite the affections and the placing of the statue, the rise of the Kim Barons was everywhere. They had operated on their own before, not stepping on Vander's toes as wolves kept in line by a stronger dog. As Powder had explored the lanes, it was clear they were more unified in the decades since the death of Vander, their old king. Shops had their symbols and their goods seemed more commonplace. That, and a term she had heard twice as a kid popped up, zone. One Kim Baron. She had no clue even if it was a Kim Baron insignia. Symbol stood out from the rest. A single open eye with harsh stick carvings of eyelashes. After a while, it felt like less like eyelashes and more like pins, forcing the eye to watch over the Undercity eternally. The eye of the gods. Even in the Undercity, the gods only had one of something, and they had to take turns with it. When Powder had climbed over the old fish and food stall, a place that had good gossip, she felt too ill to get close. The brothel was out of the question, too. She was terrified of being recognized alongside the fact that her stomach kept clenching up at the thought of even being jokingly touched. If someone touched her, if someone even said her name, she would crumble into the dust. She leaned forward on her knees. I don't want to go back. I can't turn around. The way home was closed to me. I'm not meant to come back to. Milo and Clag are dead. Vi and Echo gone. Vander had been like a god, and even he'd not been able to survive. She'd run the scenarios over in her mind, staring up at the ceiling at night. Pathways like lining wires to smoke bombs. They all led to nowhere, and everywhere. Most led to her death. If she had been there, she would have died. But what if... No! Powder pressed the bottom of her palms against her eyes, holding them there and counting back from 100. She made a promise to herself that when she had turned around, she would brave the past needed, and she'd drag Victor and herself back to Piltover with some sort of hero's welcome, even if Piltover was the worst, and would probably find a way to give someone else credit for Powder having saved her own family. She turned, and 10 feet away in his enforcer's uniform and mechanized breathing apparatus was the sheriff of Piltover, Marcus. He looked so supremely out of place in his fine clothes. How he hadn't been jumped yet was insane. He was like a walking unicorn through haunted sewers. Can I help you, officer? There was a fraction, of a sliver, of a thimble's worth of chance that he didn't recognize her. Marcus pulled out a set of iron cuffs and charged forward. Fuck. Excuse me. The Undercity and Piltover had taught Powder many hard lessons. The world could be frighteningly unfair. Everything had a price. Beautiful people got through life easier than ugly people. And sometimes the best way to deal with things was to duck, weave, and leave bridges burned behind you. Powder turned and hit the ground with wild and intensive leaps. Marcus was bigger than her, longer strides and such, but he had his breathing apparatus on. The heavy breaths he was taking through the mechanical filters would give Powder the advantage she needed. She hoped. Powder felt a rush of wind past her shoulder as Marcus threw an enforcer's bola toward her. The two metal weights attached by a length of sharp metal cord that could wrap and rip flesh off of a fleeing criminal and innocent Zon residents alike. They clattered against a steam pipe. Most enforcers carried 2 sets on them. She thought to throw back a grenade, but she didn't trust her aim and the detonation process to occur in time. Her options were drying up. Her fear was increasing rapidly. I need to get to her roof. Taking time to scramble up a ladder or scrap shed would give Marcus an opportunity to grab her at her ankles, though. Powder was more flexible and nimble than she was strong, and if he wrestled her to the ground, she had a feeling she would lose. There was no room to test it. Powder's fleeing feet and that pestering awful part of her she could not kill began to take her down alleyways and streets toward the last drop again. The crowds thickened, giving her a lead. Marcus threw another bolus that went wide to the left. A pipe salesman, a Kyrian with wrinkles around his bad ears, started cursing at the chase between Undercity Girl and Enforcer. The action was drawing an amount of attention from old men playing cards to drunks getting kicked out into alleyways. The eyes made Powder's arms itch. Every little hope she had had to use subterfuge was ripped away. Every asshole in the Undercity would know she was here. Vi would have turned around and hit the Enforcer on the head, or hit the Enforcer head on, or she would have had Milo and Clagger jump to her aid. The pinch of sadness gave birth to an idea in her time of need. The Undercity was fierce, and favors required payment. But Vander had made one thing certain. Enforcers would find the Undercity a multi-level hell on earth. Powder prayed that any of Vander's love and devotion to her old home had remained as she shouted, "Pilty Shilty!" It was an old one, classic nicknames for Piltover folks that could be painted on walls and bathroom stalls. The Undercity loved their chants, their humor, their insults. They had so little to share, but they had plenty of resentment to go around. Marcus never stood a chance. The crowds began laughing and joining in the chant almost instantly, until he pulled out the symbol of a single open eye, with either too many eyelashes or forced open by pins. It was like an arcane rune, propelling every person on the street to move as far away from Marcus, giving him space and a perfect avenue to grab Powder. No. Powder kept running, terrified by the knowledge that whoever owned that eye could control Piltover, the Undercity, erase what little magic Vander had left in the world. Marcus yelled mockingly, Piltover's faux politeness gone. "You think anyone here will help you?" She begged herself not to turn around, not to see Marcus putting fear into the people who had always had enough will at least to grumble and fight the yoke that was inherited from above. It would have made Vi sick. Now Powder moved towards the last drop, uncaring if the truth would brutalize her. It had to be the last safe place left in the world. Vander wasn't there, but some of him must have remained that wasn't shallow symbolism in the form of a petrified nostalgic statue. Powder heard the last drop before she saw it. Her childhood home was pulsating bass, and the smell of its sickly, sweet, rotting shimmer aura everywhere. The sun may have never existed until the new king of the last drop had put up their new sign. The last drop had been a bar who bragged of a warm, auburn lighting in the depths of their world. Vander had insisted on adding some candles to the whole of it. They'd killed it, like Vander. Powder stood in a plaza in dizzying terror. The green eye built of fluorescent lights dominated the last drop's storefront. When she was 10 years old, she had tried to come back, and everything she had seen had been a dream. Exiting the crypt of Powder's past was a woman she had recognized, not by name or by any strong familiarity. No, she was hazy and part of Vander's old cohort. Powder almost started crying. She hadn't been there when Powder had originally come searching for her family, but she was here now. Powder remembered her name faintly, a memory locked away until she needed it. Sevica! Powder took a risk, reaching out for that help that could only come from Vander or someone who had loved him. The full force of Marcus slammed into Powder and knocked her into the cobblestone streets. She writhed and screamed from under him. Sevica! Jace had asked Powder why she wouldn't let people help her. She called out to Sevica a third and final time. Powder's blind faith in Vander choked her as Sevica looked to Marcus and said, "What is she doing here?" Marcus snapped cuffs onto Powder's wrists, responding with heavy breaths through his respirator. "It doesn't matter. He won't find out. Sevica looked at the gawking audience and then back to the eye symbol on the last drop. Like hell he won't. You're a damn fool. Once she finds out her sister is back, she'll come for your head, and Silco won't stop her. Sister. Sister? Sister. Powder gave up. She had been a girl living on borrowed time anyway. A depressing ending for an already dead woman seemed fitting. The truth hadn't just brutalized her. It kicked in her teeth and made the funeral a slow one. With her face against the ground, glasses smudged by sweat, a firelight landed just past her nose. The little bug crawled to brush its wings against her face. There was no one in the world but her and this fragile creature who had found a way to thrive in the Undercity. And then Powder didn't give up. She twisted her head and bit into the enforcer's fingers pressed against her face, retching her head backwards against the ground and screaming in tandem. Marcus's scream and another, third yell broke through the crowd. Another batshit crazy event on top of Powder's spinning carousel of crazy-making events arrived in the form of 4 masked creatures on flying boards. Powder for the first time gave genuine thanks to whatever gods were pulling the strings. Sevica cursed quietly, and from a holster on her side she pulled a blade that's hilt warped and wrapped into her flesh. Her veins turned purple with the signs of shimmer injection coursing through her and the almost mythic blade. She jumped into the fray of screaming people to do battle with the flying board riders. Powder laughed hysterically. It was a miracle. Echo would have loved this. Powder felt Marcus's weight give a bit and she scrambled and kicked away. Her arms were cuffed behind her back, and with nothing but pure adrenaline and half-disbelieving glee was she able to flee in to the screaming crowd. And that, my friends, was the end of Part 2, The Heir and the Spare. All I can say is, damn, all right. We got some action going on here. I felt like a lot of before was like, you know, building that lore world, building where the story's gone, and in Part 2 now, like we had at the end of Part 1 and stuff like that, you know, we had that like bit of, okay, Victor got taken. You know, that was scary. And we had all this stuff before leading up to it that had happened that's given us like their backstories a little bit more, like what's going on at the current time. This was just, man, this was like a high octane, like paced feel the entire time. I feel like, you know, it was high octane stealth at first. Her, you know, Powder going little by little, going everywhere, trying to do the best she can, having near-death experiences, just trying to remember the layout of the city and get through it again, seeing all the new changes. Into a full-on chase scene, calling out to someone who you'd hoped would help you, and ended up being someone who would just not even turn their back on you, but assist the person trying to harm you. So it's a tough one. It's a tough one, but it makes me excited to see where we go into the next chapter. So let's finish up. It looks like Part 2 still is under the same name, so we'll just kind of like do Part 2, The Heir and the Spare, maybe like Part 2 or something on our video. So we'll find out what I decide. Y'all, make sure to stay beautiful, stay hydrated, and we'll see you in the next chapter. Bye.